There's a psychological principle that most people get completely backwards. They think attraction is built through constant attention and validation. It's actually the opposite. The people who become obsessed with you are the ones who can't quite figure you out. This is the first principle of what psychologists call the scarcity principle, combined with intermittent reinforcement. Your attention becomes valuable precisely because it's not always available. When someone knows they can have you whenever they want, you become background noise. When they're uncertain, you become something they think about constantly. The mechanism is simple. Your brain is a prediction machine. It's constantly trying to anticipate what's coming next. When something is predictable, your brain stops paying attention. It's solved the puzzle. But when something is unpredictable, your brain gets stuck in a loop trying to solve it. That loop is obsession. Think about why people get addicted to slot machines. It's not because they always win. It's because they sometimes win. The randomness creates an obsessive loop in the brain. The same thing happens in human relationships, except most people do the exact opposite. They try to be perfectly consistent and available. They send messages right away. They always show up. They're always happy to see the other person. What you need to do instead is create what's called the curiosity gap. This is the space between what someone knows about you and what they want to know. The wider that gap, the more they think about you. Here's how this works in practice. When someone asks you about yourself, you don't give them the full picture. You give them just enough to make them want more. You mention something interesting and then change the subject. You share a vulnerability, but then become mysteriously unavailable. You're warm one moment and then distant the next. Not in a cruel way. In a way that makes them wonder what they did wrong, what they're missing, who you really are beneath the surface. This is where dark psychology gets uncomfortable for people. Because this actually works. It works really well. The person starts constructing a version of you in their mind that's probably better than the real you. They fill in the gaps with their own hopes and desires. They become invested in solving the puzzle of who you are. The second mechanism at play here is something called the halo effect, combined with selective sharing. When you're selectively available, the moments you do show up become magnified in someone's memory. They remember the good interactions with crystal clarity because they're contrasted against the periods of distance. If you're always there, everything blends together. But if you're sometimes there and sometimes mysteriously absent, the moments you're present feel special. They feel rare. This is why people often become more obsessed with someone who treats them inconsistently than with someone who treats them well consistently. It's not healthy, but it's real. The brain literally cannot help itself. The third element is what psychologists call the need for closure. Humans hate uncertainty. We'll work incredibly hard to resolve it. When someone doesn't understand you, when your actions don't quite add up, when they can't predict you, they become determined to figure it out. They think about you more. They analyze your words. They replay conversations. They construct theories about who you are and what you want. Now, the key distinction here is that this isn't about manipulation in the crude sense. You're not lying or being deliberately cruel. You're simply being less available than someone expects. You're being more complex. You're being harder to read. You're creating space between yourself and another person. In the next section, we're going to get into the specific behavioral patterns that trigger this response most powerfully. So let's talk about what actually happens in her mind when you create that space. Psychologists call it the scarcity principle. When something becomes less available, we assign it more value. It's not manipulation. It's how human attention works. A person who's always there, always responsive, always eager, they become background noise. A person who's selective, who has other priorities, who sometimes doesn't respond for hours, they become interesting. They become something to think about. This is where most people get it wrong. They think obsession comes from grand gestures or constant attention. It doesn't. Obsession comes from inconsistency mixed with occasional reinforcement. You give her your full attention one moment, then you're distant the next. Not in a cruel way. In a way that says you have a full life she's not the center of. Here's the pattern that triggers it most powerfully. Withdrawal followed by reward. You're engaged, present, maybe even vulnerable. Then you pull back slightly. You're busy. You're focused on something else. Your responses get shorter. Then, just when she's starting to feel the distance, you return. You're warm again. You're attentive again. That cycle, pull, distance, return, creates a psychological loop she can't stop thinking about. This is why unpredictability is so potent. If someone knows exactly what to expect from you, there's nothing to wonder about. But if your availability, your warmth, your interest fluctuates based on what you're doing and who you are, not based on what she does, she'll start trying to figure you out. She'll replay conversations. She'll wonder what she did wrong. She'll wonder what she could do differently. And that wondering is obsession. The second mechanism is what's called the pratfall effect. People become more attractive when they show minor flaws or vulnerabilities, but only if they're otherwise competent. A perfect person is boring. A flawed person is relatable. A competent person with carefully chosen vulnerabilities is magnetic. You don't hide who you are. You just don't perform for her. You're comfortable being imperfect around her, which paradoxically makes you seem more real, more rare, more worth her attention. The third pattern is what I call selective investment. You're not interested in everything she does or says. You don't hang on her every word. But when something genuinely interests you about her, a goal she mentioned, a fear she revealed, something that actually connects to who you are, you engage deeply. You remember details. You ask follow-up questions weeks later. That selective attention is more powerful than constant attention, because it signals that your interest is genuine, not obligatory. These patterns work because they're rooted in how human psychology actually functions. We're drawn to people who seem to have standards, who have lives outside of us, who aren't desperately seeking our validation. We're drawn to people who are a little bit hard to figure out. We're drawn to people who make us feel special by choosing to invest in us, rather than investing in everyone equally. The key is that none of this requires you to be cold or cruel or deliberately manipulative. It requires you to be authentically yourself, to have your own priorities, your own interests, your own standards, and then to not apologize for that, to not perform, to not try to be what you think she wants. Because the moment you stop performing, the moment you become genuinely hard to read because you're actually complex and independent, that's when the real pull begins. This is where most people completely misunderstand what's happening. They think being mysterious means being cold or distant. It doesn't. It means being genuinely unavailable in ways that matter. Your attention becomes valuable because it's not infinite. You're not texting back in seconds. You're not rearranging your life around her schedule. You're not seeking her approval on every decision. Here's what dark psychology reveals about how this works in the brain. When someone gets inconsistent rewards, their dopamine system actually activates more intensely than with consistent rewards. It's called variable ratio reinforcement. She doesn't know when she'll get your full attention, so she keeps checking, she keeps trying. The uncertainty makes her brain work harder to predict you, and that cognitive effort is what creates the obsession. But here's the critical part that separates this from manipulation. You're not deliberately withholding to punish her or control her. You're simply living a full life. You have projects that matter to you more than her validation. You have friends you prioritize. You have standards about how you spend your time. When you actually live this way, it shows. It's not an act. And that authenticity is what makes it magnetic. Think about the people you've been most drawn to in your own life. They weren't the ones desperately seeking your approval. They were the ones who seemed to have somewhere else they'd rather be. The ones with their own thing going. That wasn't calculated. That was just how they lived. And you wanted to be part of that world. The second layer of this is what we call the scarcity principle. When something is rare, we assign it more value. Your time, your emotional availability, your genuine interest. These become more valuable, precisely because you're not handing them out freely. But again, this only works if it's real. If you're faking unavailability while secretly desperate, she'll sense it. People can feel neediness like a smell. It's in the micro-expressions, the response times, the way you lean in when she talks. What you're actually building is what psychologists call secure attachment, combined with what's sometimes called anxious attachment in the other person. She becomes secure in knowing you're genuinely secure. But that security creates a gap, and humans are wired to try to close gaps. She'll invest more energy trying to understand you, trying to get closer, trying to earn more of your attention. The final piece is this. When you operate from your own internal standards rather than her expectations, you become unpredictable in the best way. You might compliment her genuinely when she least expects it. You might show up with real vulnerability about something that matters to you. But because these moments are authentic and not performed, they land differently. They feel like gifts rather than transactions. She's not obsessed with a character you're playing. She's obsessed with someone who has their own life, their own standards, and who chooses to include her in it. That's the distinction that matters. That's what creates lasting pull, instead of shallow manipulation that collapses the moment you slip up, or she figures out the game. Now here's where most people get it wrong. They think obsession comes from constant attention, from being available, from proving how much they care. They flood her phone. They adjust their schedule around hers. They make themselves the center of her world by force. That's the opposite of what actually works. The psychological principle at play is called scarcity. When something is rare, when access to it is limited, the human brain assigns it more value. It's not a character flaw, it's how we're wired. We want what we can't have. We chase what moves away from us. So the second layer of this is your availability itself becomes a reward. Not your words, not your promises. Your actual presence and attention become something she has to earn, something she has to wonder about. This doesn't mean playing games with response times or deliberately ignoring her. That's transparent and it backfires. What it means is, you have a life that's genuinely interesting enough that you're not always waiting for her to text. You have projects, you have friendships, you have goals that matter to you independent of whether she's in the picture. When you're actually busy, when you're actually focused on something that matters, your delayed responses aren't calculated. They're real, and she feels the difference. The third element is what psychologists call the principle of consistency. Once someone has taken a position with you, once they've decided they like you or want you, their brain works to justify that decision. They look for evidence that supports it. They minimize evidence that contradicts it. They become invested in the story they've told themselves about who you are. But here's the critical part. This only works if you give her something to invest in. You can't be a blank slate. You have to have opinions. You have to have boundaries. You have to occasionally say no or disagree with her. Because the moment you become a mirror, the moment you're just reflecting back what she wants to hear, you become replaceable. Obsession requires friction. It requires someone to work through something, to figure someone out, to feel like there's more to discover. When you're completely transparent, completely available, completely aligned with her every preference, there's nothing left to chase. The fourth layer is what happens in her mind when you're not there. This is where the real obsession is built. It's in the space between your interactions. She's thinking about that thing you said. She's replaying that moment. She's wondering what you're doing. She's interpreting your actions through the lens of someone who's already decided you matter. This is the compound effect of everything else working together. You've created a character with standards. You've made yourself unavailable enough that your attention is valuable. You've given her just enough friction and mystery that she can't quite figure you out, and now her own mind is doing the work for you. She's obsessed, not because you've manipulated her into it. She's obsessed because she's made a choice to be interested, and now her brain is working overtime to justify that choice and fill in the gaps you've left behind. That's sustainable, that's real, and that's what actually lasts. Work for you. She's obsessed not because you've manipulated her into it. She's obsessed because she's made a choice to be interested, and now her brain is working overtime to justify that choice and fill in the gaps you've left behind. That's sustainable, that's real, and that's what actually lasts. So here's what you need to remember as you move forward. The techniques we've covered, scarcity, inconsistency, mystery, selective vulnerability, they're not tricks. They're principles of human psychology that work because they tap into how attraction and obsession actually function in the brain. When you understand these principles, you stop chasing validation through constant communication. You stop trying to convince someone you're worth their time. Instead, you become someone whose presence matters precisely because it's rare. But here's the critical distinction. There's a line between creating genuine intrigue and being deliberately cruel or deceptive. The difference is intent. If you're using these tools to build real connection with someone who's genuinely interested, you're operating in healthy territory. If you're using them to trap someone, to punish them, or to control their emotions without their awareness, you've crossed into manipulation that damages both of you. The people who truly understand dark psychology know that the most powerful version of this isn't about making someone obsessed with you despite themselves. It's about creating conditions where they choose to become obsessed because being around you, or thinking about you, genuinely improves their life. Your scarcity makes your presence feel valuable. Your mystery makes them curious. Your consistency in the things that matter makes them trust you. Your selective openness makes them feel special. This is why it works long-term. Because obsession built on genuine value is obsession that doesn't collapse the moment someone better comes along. It doesn't evaporate when you slip up or have a bad day. It survives because it's rooted in something real. As you apply what you've learned, ask yourself one question before you act. Am I doing this because I genuinely want to build something with this person? Or am I doing this because I need to feel powerful? The answer determines whether you're building attraction or just feeding your own ego. The people who master this understand that real power isn't about control. It's about influence. It's about being so genuinely interesting, so grounded in your own life, so selective about who gets your time, that other people naturally want more of you. Not because you've tricked them. Because you've made yourself worth wanting. That's the takeaway. Stop trying to make someone obsessed. Start becoming someone worth being obsessed with. Build your life so compelling that your absence is felt. Be so selective with your energy that your presence becomes a privilege. Be mysterious not through games but through depth. Be inconsistent not through indifference, but through unpredictability rooted in your own growth and evolution. When you shift from manipulator to someone genuinely worth obsessing over, everything changes. The relationships work better. The obsession lasts longer, and you get to keep your integrity intact. That's not just psychology, that's wisdom.